A law is coming that could drag some of the richest, most insulated men in the world straight into the light, whether federal agencies want it or not. That's the warning Thomas Massie sent like a shockwave through Washington. And the way he said it, you could feel the room change. He wasn't guessing. He wasn't theorizing. He was telling the DOJ and FBI, in plain English, that once this bill becomes law, hiding, delaying, or slow-walking anything related to the Epstein files won't just be bureaucratic hesitation. It will be a crime.
To change his bill in the way that Speaker Johnson wants it changed.
And why do you think the Speaker changed his vote ultimately, or changed his tune, I should say, and then voted accordingly?
Two reasons, but to kind of go back to the same reason. Number one, Trump told him to do it, and this Speaker of the House is always going to do whatever President Trump wants. Number two, they both, I think, came to the conclusion that Trump was asking my colleagues to walk a plank that was going to cost them the majority, and then that it would be no good for the president or our speaker in that instance. So I think it was a political calculation.
Can you just explain, though, I mean, the whiplash that we were seeing here from going from this bill looking like it had no chance to now passing overwhelmingly and potentially being law by the end of the night?
Have I done an interview with you when you've said, surely you know this must be dead on arrival in the Senate or something? But no, it has gone from presumably dead on arrival, presumably getting vetoed, to now getting fast-tracked and having a nearly unanimous majority here in the House. And I think it's because three brave women, Lauren Boebert, Nancy Mason, Marjorie Taylor Greene, couldn't be flipped. I think all along they were hoping they could flip those women into taking their names off of the petition, and they never could.
And it's a concern about the political fallout for the GOP, which caused the Speaker to change his mind, you think?
Absolutely. The president was pitting the GOP conference against our own base. Like 80% of Republicans wanted these files released, and the other 20% just didn't care. There was literally nobody who said not to release these files. And it was also a campaign promise. I think the calculation ultimately for the Speaker and the President was a political calculation. They realized this could jeopardize the majority if they took the side, literally the side of pedophiles and rapists.
And what if they don't release the files now?
You know,
because they could say it's an investigation that's ongoing.
Today they decided to pull the Band-Aid off. I hope they continue that effort in the Senate and in the White House. We will know when the Epstein files are released because men will go to prison. And until that happens, the justice hasn't been served. I know through the victims' lawyers, there are at least 20 credible accusations of rape and sex trafficking that have been relayed to the FBI, and they've done nothing about it, and it resides in their 302 files. The White House has announced a bunch of partisan investigations. I think that's a bad idea. This was never a partisan issue, and I think it's another bad idea if, I'm not sure their motivations, but if that was to create silos of information that can't be released based on these investigations. But even if they start 10 investigations, there's no way they're going to cover up the crimes that have been perpetrated on 1,000 victims. So names of rich and powerful men will get released when the president signs this bill. And they are criminally liable at the DOJ and FBI if they don't release these files. This is a law. It's a steep effort, right? Not just to do a discharge petition and get it passed through the House, but to get the Senate to pass it and get the White House to sign it. We're not there yet, but when we get there, this is not a subpoena. This is a law.
And so you are confident that these documents will ultimately come out, even if the president tries to fight this?
Yes, I'm confident. And that we sort of, we know when they're out because we know what some of these lists, who some of the men are. I don't have the names in my head right now. The ultimate thing that we could do is read the names on the floor of the House, and that could happen, but what needs to happen is the FBI needs to release these names.
Is that something you might do if he resists this, if the DOJ releases this? Could you go to the floor and read these names?
We absolutely would do that. Marjorie would do that. I would do that. There are Democrats who would do that, and but that's not the right path forward. That's the last effort if we hit all of the walls. But so far, we're making it through the walls and over the walls, and we're getting this done.
And how much time are you willing to give the president and the administration to release these documents when this becomes law?
I've never set a timeline. The victims have waited a very long time to get justice, and it's really up to them.
Okay, all right, I understand. Thank you. All right.
And that one statement instantly reframed everything we thought we knew about this investigation. Because if what Massie describes is true, if victim statements, witness lists, and years of untouched investigative material really are sitting inside government files, then the question isn't whether these names will come out. It's whether the agencies that have held them for years are ready for what happens when they do. And that's where this starts to feel less like politics and more like a countdown. Massie says the government already knows more than the public has ever been allowed to see. That the moment the law is signed, the shield drops. And that the only thing standing between years of secrecy and a wave of accountability is a signature on a single piece of paper. But as heavy as that is, it's not even the part that stunned people the most. It was what he said next, something almost no sitting member of Congress ever says out loud. Massie claimed there are men, well-connected, wealthy, globally influential, whose names appear in victim statements given to federal authorities. Statements that, according to the victims' attorneys, the FBI has held for years. Statements that, in his words, point to credible accusations that were never pursued. He said it without hesitation. And suddenly, the fight over this bill wasn't about paperwork. It was about whether some of the most powerful figures alive could finally face consequences for things that have been whispered, rumored, and buried for decades. But this whole confrontation didn't appear out of nowhere. It started with something many people missed, an attempt inside Congress to protect a new class of victims. At least, that's what Massie calls it. The push wasn't to protect survivors. It was to protect the wealthy men who flew on those jets to that island, shielding them from unfounded accusations, as the speaker framed it. But Massie shot back that this wasn't about shielding the innocent. It was about shielding the guilty. He argued that there were individuals who had credible allegations against them, allegations the FBI never followed through on, and that watering down the bill was nothing more than an attempt to let those individuals escape the sunlight they've avoided for so long. And then something wild happened. The Speaker of the House, who had been resisting this bill, flipped. Not because of new evidence. Not because of moral clarity. Massie says it was politics. Plain, cold politics. That Trump told the Speaker to support the bill, and that the Speaker always follows orders. But even that wasn't the full picture. Massie says they both realized something else, something much more dangerous. That if they blocked the bill, they would be choosing the side of secrecy. Worse, they would be choosing the side that looked like it was protecting men accused of horrific acts. And that was political suicide. Their own base wanted transparency. 80%, Massie says, demanded it. And the remaining 20% didn't care, as long as the files weren't buried again. So the calculation changed. Support the bill or risk losing the majority. Support the bill or alienate the voters. Support the bill or look like you're siding with the men the public least wants protected. That's why the political whiplash happened. One moment this thing was dead on arrival, doomed in the Senate, certain to be vetoed. The next moment it was being rocket launched through the House with overwhelming support. Massie credits 3 women, Lauren Boebert, Nancy Mace, and Marjorie Taylor Greene. He says leadership could never flip them, never bully them into removing their names from the discharge petition. And because they held their ground, the entire dynamic shifted. That refusal created a pressure point that leadership could no longer avoid. But the real bombshell was what Massie said about the moment the files actually hit the public. He didn't dance around it. He didn't use vague language. He said, when the Epstein files are released, men will go to prison. Let that sink in. A sitting U.S. congressman openly stating that federal agencies already possess information that could put high-profile individuals behind bars. He stresses that these aren't rumors floating online. These are victim statements relayed directly to the FBI. At least 20 such statements, he says, pointing to rape and trafficking allegations that were never acted upon. He claims they're in the 302 files, internal interview documents federal agents write after speaking to witnesses. And if that's true, then the agency's long-held explanation that the case lacked actionable material starts to collapse. Massie asks a question that should make anyone uncomfortable. If these statements exist, and if victims provided names, then what exactly does actionable mean? Why were these leads never followed? Why were individuals named in victim statements allowed to slip away untouched? Why, after decades of this investigation spanning multiple states and multiple administrations, is Congress the entity finally forcing movement? It's a question with implications far beyond this one scandal. When agencies claim something isn't actionable, is that a legal standard or a convenient shield? Massie believes that once this becomes law, federal agencies won't have a choice. The files must be released, period. And if they refuse, they aren't just defying Congress. They're violating federal statute. That's why he says he's willing to go one step further. Something dramatic, something rarely done, something that would ignite a political firestorm. He says members of Congress could read the names aloud on the House floor. He doesn't say this lightly. He calls it a last resort, the nuclear option. If the DOJ holds back, if the FBI resists transparency, if every other mechanism fails, then reading the names publicly forces them into the congressional record forever. And he says it wouldn't just be him. Some Republicans would do it. Some Democrats would do it. A rare bipartisan moment built entirely on frustration with federal stonewalling. But as intense as that sounds, Massie still insists transparency shouldn't have to reach that point. He wants the agencies themselves to comply. Because the moment they do, he says, there will be no confusion about whether the files have truly been released. The fallout will be obvious. The consequences will be real. And for the first time in decades, some level of justice might finally be within reach. And that's the core of this whole fight. Justice that has been delayed for so long that victims have been forced to rely on Congress to do what the system failed to do. Massie says it doesn't matter whether the White House tries to stall, whether agencies claim investigations are ongoing, whether politics interferes. Once the law is active, transparency becomes mandatory, and public confidence, already hanging by a thread, depends on it, because this case isn't partisan. It never was. It's about whether institutions that promise accountability can deliver it when the people involved aren't ordinary citizens, but extremely wealthy, extremely connected men with influence spanning finance, entertainment, politics, and global industry. It's about whether the justice system treats everyone equally, or whether some people are simply too powerful to touch. Massie ends by saying victims have waited long enough, that the timeline isn't his to set, it belongs to them, and that the only way the country will know justice has finally started is when federal agencies release the files, names become public, and actual legal consequences follow. Until then, the system hasn't done its job, and when a member of Congress says all of that on camera, without hesitation, without coded language, it tells you something. It tells you this fight isn't cooling down. It's just beginning. If you want more deep dive breakdowns that cut through the noise and reveal what's really happening beneath the surface, make sure you subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next episode. The more pressure for transparency, the harder it becomes for institutions to hide in the dark.